In the last video, we introduced the concept of lambda functions, which are simply functions that we define with a number of parameters. We include an expression, and we can then assign this anonymous function to a variable, which then stores this lambda function object. Now we can use lambda functions in conjunction with other functions that take in a function as an argument. And the first function we're going to look at is the filter function. Now the filter function is a built-in Python function. So if I type out filter and then put a set of parentheses and then take a look at the documentation that supports this, you can see that the filter function takes in a function and then it takes in an iterable. And you can see that we will then return an iterator yielding those items of iterable from which function is true. So what does this mean? Well, basically, this means the first parameter will take in a function. The second parameter will be an iterable, so a list, for example. And then when we run this, each item in the iterable will be sent into the function, and if it evaluates to true based on the expression, the result is returned. So let's see an example where we have a list, and we'll call this num_list, and inside this list, we'll store integers from 1 to 10. So this will be our iterable, and we're going to pass this as the second item in our filter function. Now the first parameter is a function, so I'm going to define a function, and my intention here is to filter out the even numbers from this list and return those even numbers as a new list. So I'm going to put lambda and then num, which is what I expect each of these items in the iterable to be passed into when we run the filter function. I'm then going to put a colon, and then I'm going to put in brackets num modulo 2 is equal to 0. So this is my expression, and therefore when we pass in num into this expression, it's either going to evaluate to true or it's going to evaluate to false. So when I run this code block, you can see that it relates to a lambda function with a single parameter called num. So what I can now do is use my filter function and pass in these two lines of code into the respective parameters. So if I put filter and then open a set of brackets, I can copy and paste my function code and place it as my first parameter. I can then put a comma, and the second parameter I can include my iterable. So I can simply type num_list. Now if we run this line of code, you'll see that we bring back a filter object with its respective location in memory, which is obviously very difficult for us to see the result, but as we've seen earlier in the course, in order to convert this into a list, we can pass this into the built-in list function. So if I wrap this in the list function, you can see that when I press return, we do indeed bring back 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, which are the even numbers from our num_list. And we could then assign this to a variable called even_nums, and then we can then use this list in subsequent parts of our code. So hopefully not too tricky to understand, the filter function is a function that takes in two items. The first item will be a function, and this is where the lambda function is a good option. The second parameter is an iterable, and for each item in the iterable, it will be passed into the function and will be evaluated accordingly. If it evaluates to true, it will be filtered accordingly, and we can then pass this into the list object. Okay, so moving on to the map function. How does the map function work? Well, it's very similar to the filter function, but this time what the map function will do is take every item in the iterable and pass it into the function, where the function's expression performs some kind of action. So it won't evaluate to true or false and filter items, but it will perform some form of logic, and then it will be returned accordingly. So let's start with our iterable, and we'll define this as a list called odd_nums, and we'll set this equal to odd numbers from 1 through to 15. We can then create our function. So our function in this case is simply going to double the numbers within this list. So we're going to put lambda and then num. We can then put a colon, and then our expression will be num multiplied by 2. Now we have these two bits of information, we can pass them into the map function. So we can put map, and then the first parameter will be the function itself. So we can put lambda num times 2. And then we can put a comma, and the second parameter will be the iterable, so we can pass in odd_nums. Now when I run this code, you can see that we store a map object at the respective location in memory here. So in order to convert this into a readable list, we can pass this into the built-in list function. And when we run this, you can see that we obtain a new list which doubles every number from the odd_nums list. And if we wanted to, we could assign this to a variable for onward use. Now sometimes it's cleaner to compartmentalize your code, so what you may want to do in this instance is assign your list to a variable called odd_nums and assign your function to a variable called double to give it some form of meaning. I can then delete the lambda function inside the map function and I can replace this with the variable name double. And when we run this, we get the same result. And this to many is a lot easier to see because you can then see that the map function takes in two parameters, the first one being the function, which we can see is defined above, and the second one being the iterable, which we can also see is defined above. So in this video we've seen how we can pass in lambda functions into other built-in functions such as filter and map.